Ethan Miller said, "No, this can't be real." His fingers trembled as he scrolled through the email chain, each line sharper than a knife. Fraud hidden in plain sight, his name tagged as if he had signed the approvals. His chest tightened, sweat dripping down his temple, though the office air conditioning blasted cold. The hum of computers sounded louder, like a swarm closing in. His badge, lying on the desk, suddenly felt heavy, a brand of guilt he hadn't earned. Ethan whispered, "They're setting me up," his voice cracking under the weight of betrayal. A coworker walked past, their eyes darting away too quickly, like guilt had brushed their shoulder. He glanced at the glass doors, the faint reflection of his strained face staring back. Papers rustled, a sound too sharp, too intentional, as though walls were listening. The cursor blinked on his screen, mocking, demanding a decision. Stay silent and sink, or fight and drown. He clenched his jaw. Ethan said, "Not this time," though fear twisted every word. His pulse thundered, drowning out reason. The world tilted, and in that second, the collapse began. Ethan Miller said, "It's like they erased me." He stood in the office corridor, staring at the glass badge scanner that had turned red instead of green. The soft denial tone buzzed in his skull, louder than thunder. His badge felt cold in his palm, like metal rejecting his very existence. He swiped again, desperate, but the silence that followed was worse. Behind him, two colleagues whispered, their voices cutting into him like blades. He caught fragments. "Did you hear? Locked out already." His chest heaved, lungs refusing steady air. He pressed his forehead against the glass door, his breath fogging the pain. The lobby security guard looked up, gaze unreadable, already moving toward him with slow, heavy steps. Ethan whispered, "They want me gone," and the words felt final. He turned his head, catching his reflection, eyes bloodshot, skin gray under sterile lights. The office he had given years to now sealed itself shut, transforming into enemy territory. He dropped his badge into his pocket, each step back echoing with rejection, as though the walls themselves had spit him out. Ethan Miller said, "Open, damn it." His fist struck the glass turnstile as the badge denied him again. The scanner light blinked red, pulsing like a wound. His breath fogged against the glass, clouding his view of the office beyond. The guard's shoes echoed closer, deliberate, steady. Ethan's throat tightened, the taste of copper rising from clenched teeth. He heard a colleague behind him laugh nervously, the sound sharp and cruel. Ethan turned sharply, their eyes met for a second before they darted away, guilty silence louder than laughter. He pressed his badge once more, shaking, desperate, but nothing changed. His shoulders slumped, defeated in front of the machine that now defined his worth. Ethan whispered, "They've already erased me," his voice breaking. The guard's shadow stretched long across the polished floor as Ethan stepped back, face pale, every muscle trembling. The hum of the office beyond mocked him, a world he could no longer touch. Ethan Miller said, "Tell me you knew nothing about this." His voice cracked as he cornered Sarah Bennett, a coworker he once trusted. Sarah, 32-year-old female with brown hair pulled tight, stood frozen by the vending machine. Her eyes widened, darting toward the cameras overhead before flicking back to Ethan. She whispered, "I can't be seen talking to you," her hands trembling as she clutched a soda can. Ethan stepped closer, desperation raw in his voice. He said, "They're setting me up. You've seen the files. You know I didn't sign those approvals." Sarah's lips parted, but no words came. She turned her head, eyes wet, fear shining under the harsh fluorescent lights. Ethan's throat burned with betrayal, his last ally slipping away. Her silence screamed louder than denial. Ethan backed away slowly, hands shaking, heart caving in. He muttered, "Even you," his words like ash. Ethan Miller sat alone in the parking lot, the night air biting cold. His car headlights flickered weakly, barely cutting through the fog. He whispered, "They're closing in," the words falling heavy. He gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, chest pounding like a drum. The towering glass building loomed above, its lit windows staring down like watchful eyes. Ethan remembered the emails, the badge, Sarah's silence, each memory cutting deeper. He slammed his fist against the dashboard, pain shooting up his arm. "Not like this," he said through clenched teeth, voice shaking. The silence of the lot swallowed his rage. Across the asphalt, he noticed two men in dark coats standing still, too still, watching. His breath caught, terror coiling tight in his gut. He muttered, "I'm already hunted." His reflection in the rearview mirror stared back, pale and hollow. For the first time, he saw himself not as an employee, but as prey. Ethan Miller sat at the kitchen table, the glow of a single lamp soft against the midnight silence. His wife, Laura Miller, said, "You're scaring me, Ethan," her voice trembling as she pushed a cup of coffee toward him. Their son, Daniel, peeked from the hallway, rubbing his eyes, confusion etched into his small frame. Ethan pressed his palms to his face, the emails replaying like a broken film reel. He whispered, "They're framing me." Laura's breath caught, her hands clutching the mug like it could anchor her. Daniel shuffled closer, asking, "Are we in trouble?" Ethan's heart cracked at the question, his chest heavy with guilt. He forced a smile that broke halfway. He said, "No, buddy, it's just work." But his tone betrayed the lie. Laura's gaze held his, desperate, frightened, unspoken words hanging between them. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, every second stretching like wire ready to snap. Ethan Miller leaned against the counter, his reflection warped in the stainless steel fridge. He whispered, "I've worked too hard to be erased." Laura Miller stepped closer, touching his arm, her eyes pleading. She said, "This job has taken everything from you. Don't let it take us too." Ethan's jaw clenched, guilt flashing in his expression. He looked at her, voice low and jagged. He said, "I can't walk away. If I do, they win." Laura's shoulders slumped, tears shimmering as she turned toward the window. Outside, the suburban street was quiet, untouched by the storm raging inside their home. Ethan gripped the counter tighter, veins rising along his hand, the silence pressing down like stone. Daniel's footsteps creaked faintly above, a reminder of the life hanging in the balance. Ethan's resolve hardened, but the ache in his chest deepened with every breath. Daniel's small voice drifted into the room. He said, "Dad, why are you so sad?" Ethan Miller turned sharply, forcing a shaky smile. His son stood barefoot, clutching a stuffed toy against his chest. Laura Miller crouched beside him, her voice tender, "Daddy's just tired, sweetheart." Ethan's throat burned, words caught in the storm of truth and lies. He crouched, placing a trembling hand on Daniel's shoulder. He said, "You don't need to worry, champ." Daniel searched his father's eyes, sensing the fear his words couldn't mask. Ethan looked away, ashamed. Laura's gaze lingered on him, silently begging for honesty, but his lips stayed shut. The clock ticked loudly, filling the silence with judgment. Ethan pulled Daniel close, holding him tighter than usual, whispering, "I'll keep you safe," though his heart doubted the promise. Dinner sat cold on the table, uneaten. Laura Miller poked at her plate, eyes downcast. Daniel Miller pushed peas into little towers, oblivious to the silence suffocating the room. Ethan Miller sat rigid, staring at the flickering candle flame in the center, its dance mocking his stillness. Laura finally broke the silence. She said, "We can't keep living like this." Ethan's fork clattered against the plate, his jaw tight. He whispered, "They'll destroy me if I stop fighting." Daniel looked up, sensing the storm in their voices, his small face tense. Laura's hand reached across the table, trembling, but Ethan didn't move to meet it. The gulf between them felt wider than ever. The ticking clock, the faint hum of the fridge, the silence of suburbia, all pressed down, suffocating. Ethan Miller stood in the doorway of his son's bedroom, watching Daniel sleep. The boy's chest rose and fell, the soft rhythm a fragile reminder of innocence. Laura Miller appeared beside him, her voice barely a whisper. "Promise me you'll stop before it destroys us." Ethan's eyes glistened, but he shook his head, whispering, If I stop, they win, and everything we've lost will mean nothing. Laura's tears slipped silently down her cheeks, her hand brushing against his, but finding no grip. He turned, staring into the hallway darkness. Ethan whispered, "I'll protect you, no matter what it costs." His voice trembled, the words echoing like vows to ghosts. Behind him, Daniel stirred, murmuring in his sleep, clutching the toy tighter. Ethan's chest ached with the unbearable weight of family and truth colliding, each step forward a path deeper into fire. Ethan Miller paused at the frosted conference door, as voices thinned to a whisper inside. He heard Victor Hale say, "Keep him out of the loop," the syllables clipped and cold. The red light on the room control glowed, occupied, a tiny wound pulsing. Ethan's palms prickled, the hallway air humming like an engine about to seize. He remembered laughter here, briefings, wins that felt earned. Now the glass felt like ice between worlds. He knocked once, and silence crawled over the room. Karen Liu said, "We're in a restricted review," tone warm but dead behind the smile. Ethan swallowed grit. He said, "This concerns my approvals." Chairs scrape softly, a hush of calculated civility. The handle refused, as if the metal knew its orders. Ethan stepped back, feeling smaller with every breath. He heard papers slide, a laptop snap shut, the meeting dissolving without him. He whispered, "You can't erase me," and the corridor swallowed the words whole. Par's office smelled like paper and lemon polish, a clean scent that lied. Karen Liu said, "We value you, Ethan, but recent irregularities require discretion." He stared at the folder she didn't open, the prop performing guilt. He said, "Show me the irregularities," his voice steady and brittle. Karen folded her hands like a prayer to policy. She said, "We need your cooperation." The clock ticked with courtroom certainty. Ethan felt the floor tilt, that dream where you run and your legs refuse. He said, "You deactivated my badge." Karen's smile thinned. She said, "Temporary, while we review access controls." The word temporary felt like a blade wrapped in gauze. Ethan's chest tightened as if the room shrank around him. He said, "This is retaliation." Karen looked past him toward the window, choosing weather over truth. She said, "Document your concerns via the proper channel." The channel sounded like a drain. The break room hummed with the anxious quiet of people pretending to chew. Ethan poured coffee that tasted like metal and dread. "Mark Patel," said Rough Week, without meeting his eyes. The microwave beeped like a taunt. Ethan said, "You heard something," and the words landed like coins in a jar. Mark's smile collapsed at the edges. He said, "They say approvals trace back to you." The coffee sloshed against the cup, a tiny storm. Ethan said, "You've seen my sign-off protocol," but his voice sounded like a man underwater. Across the room, Sarah Bennett stared at her phone as if it held absolution. Ethan met her gaze with a plea he couldn't say out loud. She blinked first and looked away. The refrigerator motor kicked on, a dull machine breath. Ethan whispered, "They're closing ranks," and the room politely did not hear him. Night pressed against the windows as Ethan sifted shredded paper like snow from a bad winter. He said, "They cut the trail," fingers blackened with toner dust. The desk lamp cast a lonely cone over spreadsheets that didn't add up. He pieced lines together, edges jagged with intent. He heard footsteps in the hall that didn't pass, only hovered like doubt. Ethan said, "Show me where you hid it," as if the numbers owed him a confession. A fragment showed a transfer to a vendor that didn't exist yesterday. He felt the thrill and terror of a match in a dry forest. The HVAC coughed a cold breath, papers lifting and settling like frightened birds. He snapped photos, the shutter a metronome for the late hour. Ethan whispered, "You left fingerprints," awe mixing with fury, and the office answered with its fluorescent sigh. The numbers clicked into place with a soft, awful certainty. Ethan traced the route like a vein, from shell invoice to slush account to executive shadow. He said, "There you are, not triumph, but doom." His phone buzzed with a blocked call that pulsed and died. He saved the files to a drive small enough to swallow. Sarah's message appeared, a single line: "Stop digging." He stared at the words that smelled like fear and instruction. He typed, "Meet me," then erased it, then typed again. He said, "I need the truth," to the empty room that kept secrets better than friends. In the glass, his reflection looked older by a year he hadn't lived. He pocketed the drive, feeling its weight declare him guilty and right. The building's lights dimmed, a timed reminder that night belonged to the careful. Ethan whispered, "I'm not turning back," and the server fans offered a cold amen. Ethan Miller leaned close across the dimly lit cafe table, his voice low. "You've seen the files, Sarah. You know they aren't mine." Sarah Bennett's hands trembled around her untouched cup, steam curling like secrets escaping. She whispered, "You don't understand, Ethan. This goes higher than we thought." Ethan's chest tightened, the words striking like knives. He said, "Then we fight harder." Sarah's eyes flicked toward the door, fear swimming beneath the surface. She said, "There are people you can't fight." Ethan pressed his palms flat to the wood, jaw locked. He said, "You're all I have left." The room around them hummed with casual chatter, but it felt like a stage lit for betrayal. Sarah avoided his gaze, her silence stretching thin. The waitress passed, oblivious, her tray rattling against ceramic. Ethan whispered, "Don't leave me alone in this," but Sarah's fingers tapped the cup in restless rhythm, already answering without words. Back at his desk, Ethan Miller pieced together fresh files, his heart pounding at the revelation. He muttered, "Payments to an offshore account, signed by the board." The numbers aligned into a damning path. His phone buzzed. Sarah's name appeared, the message sharp. "Stop now, before it's too late." Ethan's stomach dropped. He whispered, "She knew." His fingers hovered above the keyboard, torn between sending everything or locking it away. The office was silent, but silence itself felt hostile. He glanced at the doorway, expecting shadows. He said, "If this reaches the board, they'll bury me alive." The hum of the computer deepened, fans straining as if machines shared his fear. He saved the evidence, sweat streaking his temple. He muttered, "Truth or survival," but the question had already answered itself. The rooftop wind cut sharp against Ethan's skin. Sarah Bennett stood a few feet away, arms wrapped tight, eyes glassy. Ethan said, "Tell me you didn't." Her silence screamed louder than confession. Finally, Sarah whispered, "They gave me no choice." Ethan's chest hollowed, betrayal heavier than the night sky. He said, "You were my ally." Sarah's voice cracked, "I tried to protect you, but they're watching me too." Ethan's fists curled at his sides, rage trembling. He said, "You fed them everything." Her tears shone under the cold glow of city lights. She whispered, "If I didn't, I'd lose everything." Ethan turned, eyes stinging, the skyline jagged and merciless. He said, "You already did." The words cut through the wind like glass. Sarah's shoulders sank, her silence final. The conference room was staged like theater. Ethan Miller stepped inside, summoned for what was framed as clarification. Victor Hale, seated at the head, said, "We've reviewed irregularities tied to your credentials." His tone dripped with authority, every syllable designed to wound. Ethan's pulse hammered, but he said, "Those signatures aren't mine." Karen Liu smiled thinly, her hands folded, silent executioner. A thick folder slid across the table, papers dense with forged approvals. Ethan's throat locked, heat flooding his skin. He said, "You built this," his voice cracking under pressure. Victor leaned forward, whispering, "Sign the confidentiality order and walk away." The room's air grew heavy, suffocating. Ethan's palms pressed to the table, refusing. He said, "I won't be your scapegoat." The silence that followed was more dangerous than words. Ethan Miller left the meeting with the folder's weight still pressing on him, though his hands were empty. The hallway felt endless, shadows stretching longer than they should. His breath rasped like broken glass. He whispered, "They've trapped me." Behind him, the door clicked shut with finality, steel sealing betrayal. He glanced at his phone, blocked calls, unanswered messages, Sarah's silence deafening. His reflection in the hallway glass looked like a ghost, face hollow. He said, "No way back." At the far end, two men in dark suits lingered, their eyes unreadable, their stillness louder than threat. Ethan slowed, the corridor shrinking with every step. He muttered, "This isn't about survival anymore," and the building seemed to exhale around him, as if walls themselves were complicit. Ethan Miller sat in his car outside the courthouse, the USB drive burning a hole in his pocket. He whispered, "This is it," as though saying it would steady his trembling hands. Laura Miller's voice echoed from memory, "Don't let them destroy us." His chest tightened, but the thought of Daniel's small voice saying, "Are we in trouble?" pushed him forward. He opened the door, the cold air cutting sharp across his skin. The building loomed above, marble steps rising like a judgmental jury. Ethan muttered, "They'll hear the truth," though his throat burned with fear. He climbed the stairs, each step heavy, the weight of silence and threat pressing on his back. His reflection in the courthouse glass looked fragile, almost broken. He whispered, "Not broken yet," and pressed forward into the firestorm waiting inside. Inside the courtroom, the silence was thick enough to choke. Ethan Miller stood, shoulders squared, though his hands shook. Victor Hale sat across the aisle, posture regal, eyes sharp as blades. Ethan said, "These documents prove systematic fraud tied directly to executive accounts." His voice cracked but carried. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Karen Liu's gaze was a mask, unreadable, her pen tapping like a slow clock. Victor smirked, whispering to counsel, his calm an act of practiced poison. Ethan pulled the drive from his pocket, placing it on the table with finality. He whispered, "No more secrets." Every eye turned toward him, and the air thickened, the silence before lightning. He stood taller, though his knees threatened to give. Sarah Bennett's betrayal unfolded in open court. The prosecutor said, "Miss Bennett, confirm your communications with Mr. Miller." Sarah's lips trembled, eyes darting toward Victor Hale. She whispered, "Yes, I shared his actions." Ethan's chest hollowed as though the air had been torn away. He said, "Sarah, why?" His voice cracked raw with grief. Sarah looked at him, tears streaking down, and said, "I was given no choice. They threatened my family." The words hit harder than any denial. Ethan's fists tightened, but his shoulders sank with sorrow. The gallery murmured louder, the truth cutting jagged edges into every heart. Ethan whispered, "You could have stood with me," but Sarah bowed her head, silence swallowing everything else. The prosecutor displayed Ethan's evidence, spreadsheets lighting the projector screen like fire. Ethan said, "Every number ties back to accounts opened under Victor Hale's authority." Gasps broke the hush. Victor stood, voice booming, "This is a fabrication." His mask slipped, anger spilling into the room. Karen Liu whispered urgently, her composure fracturing for the first time. Ethan's heart pounded, but he pressed forward, voice steadying, "You built a house of lies, and I refuse to live in it." The judge's gavel cracked, echoing like thunder, but the gallery's whispers drowned it. Victor's glare met Ethan's, predator against prey, but Ethan didn't flinch. He whispered, "Not today," beneath the roar of scandal breaking open. The climax hit like thunder rolling through the courtroom. Ethan Miller stood taller than fear, voice raw, but unshaken. He said, "You tried to bury me with lies, but the truth still breathes." His words cut through the chaos, every syllable burning with defiance. Victor Hale's face hardened, but the cracks showed. Karen Liu sat frozen, pen still in hand. Sarah Bennett wept silently, her betrayal now public wound. The judge said, "This will proceed to full inquiry," his voice stern, final. Ethan closed his eyes, a tear sliding free, not of weakness but of release. He whispered, "There's no going back now." The silence that followed wasn't defeat but reckoning. The storm had broken, and Ethan had chosen to stand in its center. Morning broke with headlines that sounded like alarms. Ethan Miller said, "They finally printed it," staring at a banner naming executives and offshore paths. The company released a statement that promised integrity while bleeding denial. Victor Hale's quote floated like perfume masking smoke. Karen Lias' name did not appear, but her fingerprints lived inside the numbers. Ethan felt no victory, only the slow ache of consequence. He whispered, "They will fight back, knowing power never surrenders quietly." Investors circled like gulls above a stormed pier. Lawyers assembled their vocabulary of doubt and delay. Ethan breathed and tasted metal, the courthouse air lingering in his lungs. He said, "This won't end clean," and the truth nodded from the page. A reporter called and asked for 5 minutes. The request sounded like a summons. Ethan closed the article and steadied his hands on the table. He said, "I'm still here," and meant it like a small prayer. Silence hung over breakfast like a veil. Daniel poked a pancake and said, "Will the bad guys go to jail?" Ethan Miller forced a gentler tone and said, "That's for the courts to decide." Laura Miller watched him with eyes that carried both relief and fear. She said, "We can't afford another month like the last one." The bills on the counter formed a little skyline of pressure. Ethan felt the map of consequence traced across each envelope. He said, "If I take a settlement, they'll bury everything." Laura's mouth tightened at the word settlement, a promise dressed as surrender. She said, "I need our home more than I need the world to know." The sentence cut clean because it was true. Ethan touched Daniel's shoulder and felt the cost in his bones. He whispered, "I will not disappear," and tried to believe the vow. At the office lobby, badge access returned with a single sterile beep. Ethan Miller said, "Temporary reinstatement," to the guard who offered a practiced smile. Colleagues drifted past like weather, avoiding a storm cell. Mark Patel nodded without stopping, the nod shaped like apology and fear. Sarah Bennett waited near the elevators, her eyes rimmed red. She said, "I'm sorry," and the apology sounded thin against marble and glass. Ethan answered, "You were cornered," but the sentence did not heal. An email announced a town hall about ethics next week. The word ethics arrived like a prop on a stage still burning. Ethan stood in the lobby and felt invisible cables pulling everyone into silence. He whispered, "You all knew," to the floor that reflected their avoidance. The elevator chimed and opened like a mouth. He stepped inside and did not look back. The journalist met him in a quiet conference room that smelled of dry erase and dust. Maya Ortiz said, "I need corroboration beyond what you gave the court." Her pen hovered like a needle finding a vein. Ethan Miller slid copies of vendor records and audit trails across the table. He said, "These show the transfers before the cleanup." Maya's gaze sharpened, trained to separate signal from theater. She said, "They will come after you harder when this runs." Ethan felt the truth like weather, changing pressure. He said, "I know, and I'm tired of being polite to fear." She nodded, and the recorder's red light grew meaning. Maya said, "I don't owe you protection, only accuracy." The sentence held the strange comfort of honesty. Ethan exhaled, a slow surrender of doubt. He whispered, "Accuracy will do," and steadied his voice for the record. Evening carried the kind of quiet that asks questions. Ethan Miller walked the neighborhood with hands in pockets and spine, aching from weeks of vigilance. He said, "What did this buy me?" to the dark that answered with crickets. Houses glowed with private peace. He could not borrow. He pictured Victor Hale drafting statements for tomorrow's market open. He pictured Karen Liu adjusting a narrative with careful hands. He pictured Sarah Bennett sleeping badly, the city in her throat. He said, "We all pay," and felt the scale shift without justice choosing sides. A breeze moved the trees like a slow agreement. He checked his phone and found another unknown number. He did not answer. He whispered, "I'll keep going until truth can stand alone," and the road stretched steady beneath his feet. Night settled like a verdict, no one read aloud, and the house breathed in shallow hush. Ethan Miller said, "It's finally quiet, though quiet felt like a blade's flat edge. The courthouse echo still lived in his ribs, a drum that refused sleep. He sat at the dining table and traced ring marks where coffee had cooled. Laura Miller stood in the doorway and said, "You should rest," her voice cautious and thin. He nodded because nodding was easier than promising peace. Daniel's door clicked softly as the boy turned in dreams he did not deserve. Ethan whispered, "I told the truth, and the room offered no reward." The refrigerator hummed like a witness tired of statements. He opened his laptop and watched headlines circle like vultures. He said, "They think this is victory," and winced at the emptiness of the word. The lamp flickered, and for a breath he felt hunted by his own resolve. He closed the screen and let the dark answer for him. The phone rang once, twice, then stopped like a breath held too long. "Ethan Miller," said, blocked again, and the words fell with dull certainty. He stared at the screen until his reflection blurred into a stranger. Outside, a siren wrote a crooked line across the night and vanished. He thought of Victor Hale polishing a denial for Dawn investors. He thought of Karen Liu drafting policy that sounded like forgiveness. He thought of Sarah Bennett counting the minutes to sleep that would not come. Laura sat beside him and said, "Turn it off for one night." He wanted to, and he could not, and he hated the difference. The screen glowed with nothing, a lighthouse warning of a coastline already hit. He whispered, "If I stop watching, they move first," and knew they would anyway. He set the phone face down and let the silence land like a final stone. Morning drew a hard line through the blinds, and paper whispered under a door. A letter waited like a snake asleep, coiled and neat. Ethan Miller said, "Certified," before he bent to lift the envelope. Laura watched with breath held, an audience of one and everything. He broke the seal and met words that sounded like velvet and threat. The resignation draft was attached to a promise of severance and silence. He said, "They are still trying to buy the ending," jaw tight with old fire. The document named reputation like a charity, and truth like a nuisance. Daniel padded in, hair wild, and asked for cereal with the unbroken calm of childhood. Ethan folded the letter and said, "Eat first, because ritual keeps walls upright." Laura touched his arm and said, "Choose the living," and the sentence shook him. He stared at the signature line and saw a grave cut to exact width. He returned to the table that had carried midnight and mercy, and chose a pen. Ethan Miller said, "If they want my silence, they can chase it through daylight." He drafted a letter that refused the script and kept his name intact. The words landed like small anchors, ordinary and unmovable. He wrote, "I will cooperate with lawful inquiry and decline confidentiality." He wrote, "I will not correct public record to favor falsehood." Laura read each line and stood straighter, as if the floor rose. She said, "Then we brace," and the truth did not bend to soothe her. He signed his name and felt a tremor pass clean through his hands. The printer coughed and accepted the copy like a reluctant clerk. He sealed the envelope and said, "I do not belong to them," quietly and complete. The house answered with a creak that sounded like old wood choosing to hold. Evening returned with the kind of quiet that makes endings audible. Ethan Miller walked to the mailbox, the envelope warm from his palm. He said, "It was worth it, not for victory, but for breath that did not hide." The street held its usual dogs and sprinklers and lives that keep moving. Hi. He slid the letter through the slot and heard it land with a soft final thud. For a moment, there was nothing to fight but gravity and time. His phone rang in his pocket, the number unknown and patient. He let it ring, and the sky turned the color of endings. Laura waited at the door, and Daniel's laughter leaked from a room down the hall. Ethan whispered, "I'm still here," and the words felt like ground underfoot. The phone stopped, and the silence did not threaten. He stood with the dusk and let the next breath arrive unafraid.